The Earth looked peaceful from space. Bright blue oceans, green forests, and golden deserts stretched across the planet, glowing under the sun. But underneath this beauty, something dangerous was lurking. An alien race had been watching humanity for years, and their plans were anything but peaceful. They were preparing for something big, and humanity had no idea. On the surface, life went on as usual. People were busy with their daily routines, scrolling through their phones, watching endless videos, and discussing the latest news that really didn't matter. Everyone was distracted, focused on their small problems and minor goals. Even the news channels, always hungry for views, missed the real story, the real threat that was creeping closer with each passing day. But not everyone was blind. Dr. Aaron West, a leading scientist and expert in space communication, had been tracking unusual signals for months. He wasn't the type to panic, but what he found had made his heart race. There were strange, unexplainable signals coming from deep space, and they were getting stronger. Every time he picked up a new signal, it was clearer and closer than before. Whatever was sending these signals was on its way to Earth, and it wasn't friendly. Dr. West tried to warn people, but no one took him seriously. When he sent his reports to world leaders, they shrugged them off. He tried to speak at conferences and share his findings with other scientists, but they all dismissed him as paranoid. After all, Earth had never been attacked by aliens before. Why would things suddenly change now? Frustrated but determined, Dr. West gathered a small group of trusted colleagues who believed him. Together, they started to investigate further. Using advanced technology and powerful telescopes, they discovered the shocking truth. Massive alien ships were moving closer to Earth, hiding just out of sight from most telescopes. These ships were far more advanced than anything humanity had ever built. Their sheer size and speed were terrifying. Dr. West and his team knew that time was running out. The aliens weren't just observing anymore. They were preparing for something. They had to find a way to warn the world, to wake people up before it was too late. But how could they break through the noise of everyday life? How could they get people to listen? One night, Dr. West stayed up late, staring at his computer screen, watching the signals grow stronger. His wife came into the room, concerned. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You look exhausted, Aaron. You need to rest." "I can't," he replied, rubbing his eyes. "Something big is coming. I don't know how to stop it." "You've been trying to warn people for months," she said softly. "Maybe they're not listening because they're too scared to believe it's real." Dr. West paused and looked at her. "That's exactly it," he said, suddenly realizing. "People don't want to face something this huge. They'd rather stay in their bubble, pretend everything is fine. But that doesn't mean you should give up," she encouraged. "Maybe you just need to find a better way to reach them." Her words stuck with him. Dr. West decided he had to change his approach. Instead of sending out scientific reports that people ignored, he needed to make the threat real, make it something they couldn't ignore. The question was, how? The next day, Dr. West called his team for an urgent meeting. "We need to go public," he said, pacing the room. "We need to show people what's coming in a way that makes them care. We can't just talk about numbers and signals anymore. We need to make them understand the danger." One of his colleagues, a communications expert named Sarah, raised her hand. "What if we released video footage of the alien ships? We've got the telescope data, right? If people see what's out there, they'll be more likely to believe us." "That could work," Dr. West agreed, feeling a spark of hope. "But we have to do more. We need to get the media involved, make this the biggest story they've ever covered. We need to make sure no one can ignore it." Over the next few days, Dr. West and his team worked tirelessly. They gathered all the evidence they had, photos, videos, and reports, and prepared to release it to the world. They knew they were up against a powerful enemy, but the real challenge was waking up humanity before it was too late. As the alien ships drew closer, the clock was ticking. Would people finally take action, or would they continue to watch from the sidelines, unaware of the storm about to hit them. Only time would tell. The awakening. The world had no idea what was coming, but that was about to change. Dr. Aaron West and his team had been working day and night, preparing to reveal the truth. The alien ships were getting closer, and humanity had to wake up before it was too late. They couldn't afford to sit back and wait anymore. Sarah, the communications expert, had finished editing the video footage. It showed the massive alien ships in space, their strange, smooth surfaces shining as they moved closer to Earth. There was no mistaking it. The ships were real, and they were coming. Dr. West looked at the video again and felt a chill run down his spine. "This has to work," he muttered to himself. The team decided to release the footage online and alert major news stations. They sent out messages to every media outlet they could think of, urging them to cover the story. But just like before, many didn't take them seriously. Some news stations even ignored the message completely. The world was still distracted by its own problems, blind to the real danger. Frustration was building among the team. "Why won't they listen?" One of the scientists, Dr. Patel, said, slamming her fist on the table. "We're giving them proof, and they still don't care. It's because people don't believe it will affect them." Sarah replied calmly. "They think this is some distant problem that doesn't matter to their daily lives." Dr. West sighed, rubbing his temples. "We have to find a way to get their attention. We don't have much time." Then something happened that changed everything. A small independent news channel picked up the story. They aired the video footage of the alien ships and interviewed Dr. West live on their show. The news anchor asked tough questions, but Dr. West answered them all with calm, clear facts. He explained the signals, the data, and the undeniable evidence that an alien invasion was coming. The story spread like wildfire. Within hours, social media was buzzing with talk of the alien ships. People were sharing the video, debating whether it was real or fake, but the evidence was too strong to ignore. Major news stations that had previously brushed off the story started covering it, afraid they would miss out on what was becoming the biggest story in history. As more people watched the video, the panic started to grow. Some dismissed it as a hoax, but others were terrified. The idea that humanity might face an alien invasion shook people to their core. The streets were filled with discussions, people in coffee shops, on buses, in their homes, all talking about one thing: the aliens. Dr. West was finally being heard, but it didn't feel like a victory. The hard part was just beginning. That evening, Dr. West and his team held a virtual meeting with world leaders. This time, they couldn't ignore him. The leaders from every major nation were present, their faces grim as they watched the footage of the alien ships. "This is not a drill," Dr. West said, his voice steady. "We don't know what these aliens want, but we do know they're coming. We have to prepare." The leaders exchanged nervous glances. The President of the United States spoke first. "What do you suggest we do, Dr. West?" "We need to unite," he replied. "Every country needs to come together to form a defense. We don't know how powerful they are, but we have to assume they're advanced. Our only chance is to work together, share our technology, and create a global defense system." There was silence on the call for a moment. Then, one by one, the leaders agreed. They knew this was no longer a time for arguing over politics or resources. If the aliens attacked, it would be humanity against an unknown enemy, and they needed to stand together. As the governments began to organize, the people on the ground were reacting in different ways. Some were frightened, stocking up on supplies and staying indoors, fearing the worst. Others saw it as an opportunity, joining volunteer groups to help spread awareness or train for whatever might come next. Among the chaos, there were still those who didn't believe. Some thought the video was a clever trick, a way to manipulate people into fear. Others believed it was an elaborate government conspiracy. But the evidence was piling up, and it was becoming harder and harder to deny the truth. Dr. West didn't have time to convince everyone. He was focused on preparing for the worst. His team began working with military and technology experts to study the alien ships in detail, trying to understand their weaknesses. There were still so many unknowns. What did the aliens want? Were they here to destroy, or was there something else? But one thing was certain: time was running out. The aliens were coming, and humanity had finally woken up to the reality. Now it was no longer just about watching the skies. It was time to take action. Dr. West knew that the real fight was only beginning. The fight for awareness. As the news of the alien ships spread across the globe, the world began to change, but not in the way Dr. Aaron West had hoped. Despite the video evidence, interviews, and urgent messages, many people were still in denial. The fight to get people to believe in the danger was turning into a battle of its own. On one side, there were those who were terrified, stocking up on food, water, and supplies. They believed every word Dr. West and his team had said. They shared the videos, posted warnings on social media, and formed online groups to discuss survival plans. These people were awake, ready to do whatever it took to protect themselves and their families. But on the other side were the skeptics, the ones who refused to believe. They called the alien ships a hoax, saying it was all part of some government conspiracy or a trick by the media to scare people. They mocked Dr. West on social media, calling him a fearmonger and a liar. Even with the evidence in front of them, they chose to close their eyes and live in their bubble of safety. Dr. West knew this would happen. He had expected resistance, but the level of disbelief was worse than he thought. Even some of the world leaders who had agreed to work together were now dragging their feet, hesitating to take real action. They didn't want to cause mass panic or risk damaging their economies. It seemed like no matter how hard Dr. West and his team pushed, the world was split into two, those who believed and those who didn't. But Dr. West wasn't about to give up. He knew what was coming, and he knew that when the aliens arrived, there wouldn't be time to convince everyone. They had to act now, or it would be too late. Sarah, the communications expert on Dr. West's team, suggested a new strategy. "We need to focus on the people who are ready to listen," she said during one of their meetings. "Forget the skeptics for now. Let's gather the believers and organize them. If we can get enough people to take this seriously, others will follow." Dr. West nodded. "You're right. We've spent too much time trying to convince the wrong people. We need to build a strong base of support." With this new approach, the team began reaching out to those who believed. They held virtual town halls, where Dr. West answered questions and explained the importance of preparing for the alien threat. More and more people joined these meetings, eager to help. They weren't just watching anymore. They were taking action. One of the most dedicated groups came from a small town in the Midwest. A man named Jack, a former soldier, had seen the news and immediately started organizing people in his community. He held meetings in the town hall, sharing Dr. West's videos and teaching people basic survival skills. Jack knew that if the aliens attacked, they would need to be ready to defend themselves. "We don't know what these aliens want," Jack said to the group during one of their meetings. "But if they come here with bad intentions, we have to be ready. We can't just sit and wait for someone else to save us." Jack's group grew quickly, and soon other towns were doing the same. People were forming local defense groups, training and preparing for the worst. It was a grassroots movement that spread faster than Dr. West had expected. Communities were coming together, sharing resources, and making plans. The fight for awareness was finally gaining ground. But it wasn't easy. The skeptics didn't go away. In fact, they became louder. They accused Dr. West and people like Jack of causing unnecessary fear and panic. Conspiracy theories grew even more ridiculous, with some claiming that Dr. West had created the alien footage with special effects, while others said the whole thing was a distraction from other political issues. Dr. West tried to stay focused. "We're not here to convince everyone," he reminded his team. "We just need enough people to be ready when the time comes." As the days passed, more signals came from space, confirming that the alien ships were getting closer. Dr. West and his team were working around the clock, analyzing the data and preparing their next move. The world was on edge, split between those who believed the danger was real and those who thought it was all a joke. But no matter how hard the skeptics tried to deny it, the truth was coming. The fight for awareness wasn't just about spreading information. It was about waking people up to the reality of the situation. And with each passing day, more and more people were starting to understand that the threat was real. Dr. West knew they didn't have much time left. The aliens would arrive soon. And when they did, the world would have to be ready. This fight for awareness was just the beginning. The real battle was still to come. Rallying the troops. Dr. Aaron West sat in front of his computer, staring at the blinking screen. He had been working nonstop for days, coordinating with people all over the world. The alien ships were getting closer, and there wasn't much time left. The fight for awareness had brought some success, but now the real challenge was here. They needed to rally people, to prepare for whatever was coming. The world's governments had finally agreed to form a global defense coalition, but it wasn't moving fast enough. Bureaucracy and politics were slowing things down. Dr. West couldn't wait for them to act. He needed to take matters into his own hands. People were ready to fight, and he had to make sure they were organized and trained. Dr. West opened a video call with Jack, the former soldier from the Midwest who had been organizing his local community. Jack had turned into a key figure in the movement. His military experience and leadership had brought together hundreds of volunteers, and more were joining every day. Jack, Dr. West began, "How are things on your end? Are the people ready?" Jack nodded, his face serious. "We've got groups training every day. People are scared, but they're determined. They know what's coming, and they want to be prepared." "That's good to hear," Dr. West replied. "We're going to need them. I've been talking with other groups in different parts of the world. We're building a network. If the aliens attack, we need to be able to communicate and coordinate across the globe." Jack leaned forward. "What about weapons? We can train all we want, but we're going to need more than rifles if these aliens are as advanced as you say." Dr. West nodded. "We're working on that. Governments are starting to share technology, and we've been developing some new tools ourselves. But the key is going to be strategy, not just firepower. We need to be smart, think ahead of the aliens." After the call, Dr. West sat back in his chair, thinking about the road ahead. The aliens hadn't made any demands or sent any communication. They were simply getting closer, watching, waiting. It was impossible to know what their intentions were, but Dr. West couldn't take any chances. They had to be ready for the worst. In the days that followed, Dr. West's team worked tirelessly to organize the global defense effort. They set up virtual training sessions where experts taught people how to fight, how to survive, and how to work together in a crisis. People from all walks of life were joining: farmers, teachers, engineers, and doctors. They weren't soldiers, but they were willing to learn. One of the biggest challenges was communication. The alien ships could arrive anywhere, and if humanity was going to stand a chance, they needed to be able to respond quickly. Dr. West and his team set up secure communication channels that connected the local defense groups. If the aliens attacked, these channels would allow the different groups to share information and coordinate their actions. The training wasn't just about combat. People needed to learn how to think in a crisis, how to stay calm under pressure. The team organized drills where groups would practice responding to different types of attacks. It was exhausting work, but it was necessary. Every hour spent training could be the difference between survival and defeat. Meanwhile, the skeptics continued to make noise. Some of them still refused to believe the alien threat was real. Others mocked the training efforts, calling it a waste of time or fear-mongering. But Dr. West knew that when the time came, those same people would wish they had been better prepared. As more people joined the defense groups, the sense of unity grew stronger. What had started as a small group of believers had turned into a global movement. People were no longer just sitting back and watching. They were taking action. Communities came together, sharing resources and offering support to those in need. It was the kind of unity Dr. West had always hoped for, but under circumstances he had never imagined. One evening, after a long day of training, Dr. West received a call from a high-ranking military official. The man's voice was grave. "Dr. West, we've detected something. The alien ships are moving again. They're changing course." Dr. West felt his heart skip a beat. "Where are they heading?" "We're not sure yet, but they're moving faster now. We estimate they'll reach Earth's atmosphere within a few days." Dr. West hung up the phone and immediately called Jack. "It's time," he said simply. "Get your people ready. We don't know where they'll land, but we need to be prepared everywhere." Jack's voice was calm, but Dr. West could hear the tension. "We'll be ready," he said. As the call ended, Dr. West looked out the window at the darkening sky. The time for training was over. Now, it was time to see if humanity was truly ready for the fight of its life. First contact. The world held its breath as the alien ships entered Earth's atmosphere. People stood in streets, looking up at the sky, watching as the massive silver objects moved silently across the clouds. The ships were unlike anything anyone had ever seen, smooth, sleek, and glowing with an eerie light. They seemed to float effortlessly, casting long shadows over the cities below. Dr. Aaron West was in the Global Command Center, surrounded by screens showing live footage of the ships from all over the world. His heart pounded as he watched, waiting for something to happen. He wasn't sure what the aliens wanted, but he knew this was the moment everything would change. "They've landed," someone said, pointing to one of the screens. The image showed a ship descending in the middle of a large field on the outskirts of a major city. It touched down without making the sound, and for a moment, everything was still. Dr. West took a deep breath. "This is it," he whispered. "First contact." Military teams, armed and ready, had already surrounded the ship, but they were under strict orders not to fire unless absolutely necessary. No one knew what the aliens would do next, but the world was watching. Everyone wanted to avoid a war if possible. Suddenly, a door on the side of the ship opened. A long ramp extended to the ground, and a tall figure stepped out. The alien was humanoid in shape, but there was something unsettling about the way it moved, smooth, almost robotic, with a grace that seemed unnatural. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes were large and black, reflecting the light like glass. The military commander on the ground, Captain Jane Harris, stepped forward cautiously. She had been chosen for this moment because of her experience and calm demeanor. She held up her hand, a gesture of peace. "We come in peace," she said through a speaker, her voice echoing across the field. The alien tilted its head, as if studying her. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, it raised its own hand, mimicking her gesture. The tension in the air was thick, but no one moved. Dr. West leaned forward, watching the exchange closely. "They're trying to communicate," he muttered to himself. His team had been working on possible ways to talk to the aliens, but without knowing their language or intentions, it was all guesswork. This was the first real attempt at understanding them. The alien took a few more steps down the ramp, stopping just in front of Captain Harris. It reached into a compartment on its chest and pulled out a small glowing device. Everyone held their breath, unsure of what it was. The alien held the device out in front of it, and suddenly, a series of strange symbols appeared in the air, floating, glowing shapes that rotated slowly. Dr. West's eyes widened. "That's some kind of language," he said. He quickly called his team. "Get me a linguist. We need to figure out what those symbols mean." Back in the field, Captain Harris didn't flinch. She kept her voice calm. "We don't understand your language, but we want to communicate." The alien didn't respond verbally, but it raised the device higher, and the symbols shifted again. This time, they formed a pattern, a star with smaller dots circling around it. It looked like a solar system. Dr. West's team was scrambling to analyze the symbols. "It's a map," someone said. "They're showing us where they're from." Dr. West nodded. "They're trying to tell us about themselves. They're not attacking. They're making contact." Just as hope was starting to rise, something went wrong. On one of the other screens, a different landing site came into view. A second alien ship had landed in a city center, and the situation was much more tense. Crowds of people had gathered, and the local police were struggling to keep them back. Some people were shouting, throwing rocks at the ship, terrified of the unknown. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed across the square. A single shot was fired by a panicked civilian, and chaos erupted. The crowd surged forward, and the alien ship reacted instantly. A bright, blinding light shot out from the ship, stunning the entire crowd and sending them into a frenzy of fear. It wasn't a direct attack, but it was enough to send people running. Back at the command center, Dr. West's heart sank. "No," he whispered. "This wasn't supposed to happen." Captain Harris, still at the peaceful landing site, received the update in her earpiece. Her face went pale, but she kept her composure. "We have to stop this from escalating," she said, glancing at the alien in front of her. It hadn't moved since the symbols appeared, but there was no telling how it would react to the violence elsewhere. Dr. West knew that first contact had just taken a dangerous turn. The aliens were here, but humanity's own fear and panic might turn this peaceful exchange into the very conflict they had hoped to avoid. The world was at a crossroads, and the next few moments would decide the future of both species. The turning point. The world held its breath as the peaceful exchange between Captain Jane Harris and the alien suddenly teetered on the edge of chaos. Dr. Aaron West's heart raced in the command center. The shot fired at the second landing site had changed everything. What had begun as a moment of calm first contact was now spiraling toward disaster. "Get me an update on the other site," Dr. West demanded. His eyes were glued to the screen, watching as Captain Harris stood face to face with the alien, both unmoving, as if waiting to see what the other would do next. One of his team members spoke up. "The crowd has scattered, but the alien ship hasn't made any further moves. It looks like the shot only triggered a defensive response." Dr. West sighed in relief. At least the aliens weren't firing back, yet. "We need to calm things down before this gets worse," Dr. West said, grabbing his headset. He connected directly to Captain Harris on the ground. "Captain, you're still in control. Keep things peaceful. We can't let one mistake ruin everything." Captain Harris nodded, though her body was tense. "Understood, Dr. West." She turned her gaze back to the alien standing before her. The glowing symbols in the air were still floating between them, the alien's map of the stars. "We want peace," Captain Harris repeated slowly, keeping her voice steady. "We want to understand you." For a moment, the alien didn't react. Dr. West watched in silence, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. Then the alien lowered the device with the symbols and took a step forward. Its large black eyes seemed to study Captain Harris carefully, as though measuring her sincerity. The command center was silent, everyone waiting for the next move. Suddenly, the alien raised its hand once more, but this time, the device it had been using to communicate shifted, and the symbols changed. Instead of a map, a series of images began to flash in the air. First, there were pictures of planets, dozens of them, some barren, some filled with life. Then came images of destruction, cities in ruin, landscapes scorched by war. Dr. West felt a chill run down his spine. "They're showing us their history," he whispered. "This is what's happened to other worlds." Captain Harris remained calm as the images flickered before her. She didn't fully understand the alien's message, but she knew one thing. It was a warning. "They've seen conflict before," Dr. West said through the headset. "They've experienced destruction. They're telling us they don't want it to happen here." The alien lowered its hand again, its expression unreadable. But in that moment, Captain Harris realized something important. The aliens weren't just visitors. They were survivors, traveling through space after witnessing the destruction of their own kind. They had come to Earth, not as conquerors, but as observers, watching to see if humanity would make the same mistakes. Back at the command center, Dr. West's mind raced. "This is the turning point," he said to his team. "We're at the edge of something bigger than we imagined. They're not here to attack. They're here to see if we can avoid the fate they've seen on other worlds." Just as hope began to rise again, another alert came through. The third alien ship, which had landed in a major city, was now facing a military blockade. The soldiers, on edge from the previous incident, were ready to strike at the first sign of aggression. Dr. West's stomach churned. One wrong move, and everything could go up in flames. "Tell them to stand down," he ordered. "We can't afford to provoke them." But even as he gave the order, the situation at the third site grew worse. A group of civilians, armed with makeshift weapons, had pushed past the soldiers. Fear and panic were taking over. They were shouting, calling the aliens invaders, and demanding action. Dr. West knew that this was the moment that would decide everything. If the aliens saw humanity as too dangerous, if they believed they couldn't trust Earth, they might leave. Or worse, they might decide to neutralize the threat entirely. "Captain Harris," Dr. West said, his voice tense, "we need to show them that we're better than this. We need to prove that we can learn from their history, that we don't want conflict." Captain Harris understood. She raised her hand again, mirroring the alien's gesture from earlier. Slowly, she took a step closer, showing that she trusted it. "We want to avoid the same mistakes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We've made errors, but we can do better. We can change." The alien seemed to hesitate, its dark eyes locked onto hers. Then, slowly, it lowered the device completely, as if accepting her words. Dr. West held his breath. This was it, the turning point. At the third landing site, the military stood down. The civilians were held back. And just like that, the world shifted. Humanity, standing on the edge of fear and panic, had taken a step toward peace. The aliens didn't move to attack. They didn't leave. Instead, they waited, watching closely, as if giving humanity one last chance to prove itself worthy of survival. And in that moment, Dr. West knew that the future was still in their hands, if they could just hold on to it. The final showdown. The tension across the planet was unbearable. Humanity had reached the brink. And now, everything came down to a single moment. In the command center, Dr. Aaron West watched the live feeds as the alien ships hovered above Earth. They weren't attacking, but they weren't leaving either. It was clear. The fate of the human race rested on what happened next. The peaceful exchange between Captain Jane Harris and the alien had bought them time, but it wasn't enough. There were still groups around the world ready to act out of fear. Riots had broken out in some cities, and military forces in others were still on high alert, their weapons aimed at the sky. It felt like the whole planet was holding its breath. "We can't let this end in violence," Dr. West said, pacing back and forth. He knew that if even one group attacked the aliens, they would respond with overwhelming force. Humanity wasn't ready for a war with an advanced species like this. The aliens had shown they had the power to wipe out entire civilizations, and they wouldn't hesitate if they thought Earth was a threat. Captain Harris, still on the ground at the alien landing site, kept her team calm. The alien, who had shown her images of other worlds destroyed by conflict, stood silently beside her. Its expression was impossible to read, but its presence was a reminder of how close they were to repeating the mistakes of other species. "What's the next move?" Harris asked quietly over her radio. Dr. West took a deep breath. "We need to show them unity," he replied. "They're watching us, waiting to see if we're different. We have to prove that humanity can come together, that we can learn from their warnings." But it wasn't going to be easy. Reports were coming in from all over the world. Some groups were still refusing to believe the aliens meant peace. Others were trying to take matters into their own hands, convinced that an attack was the only way to protect the planet. Dr. West knew they were running out of time. "We need a global broadcast," Dr. West said suddenly. "We need to address the whole world, right now, and make them see what's really at stake." His team scrambled to set up the broadcast. Within minutes, the signal was ready, and Dr. West stood in front of the camera. His face was serious, his voice steady. He knew this was the most important speech he would ever give. "People of Earth," he began, "this is our moment. The aliens have come here not as enemies, but as observers. They've seen worlds destroyed by fear, by war, and they've come to see if we will make the same mistakes." Images of the alien symbols appeared on the screen behind him, the same ones that had shown the destruction of other planets. The message was clear. Humanity was at a crossroads. "We are on the edge of something greater than any of us have ever known," Dr. West continued. "But we can only survive if we stand together. Fear will destroy us, but unity will save us." Around the world, people stopped and listened. The rioters paused. The soldiers lowered their weapons. Dr. West's words echoed in their minds, reminding them that their actions now would determine the future of the human race. Back at the alien landing site, Captain Harris felt a shift in the air. The alien, still standing by her side, seemed to relax slightly, as if sensing that humanity might be making the right choice after all. The peaceful exchange had opened a door, and now, the human race was deciding whether to walk through it. But just as hope began to spread, a single transmission cut through the airwaves. It was a rogue group, a small faction of extremists who believed that humanity should strike first. They had managed to hijack a military drone, and they were planning to launch an attack on one of the alien ships. Dr. West's heart dropped. "No," he whispered. "Not now. Not when we're so close." The drone shot through the sky, speeding toward the nearest alien vessel. It was too fast to stop, and the military had no way of intercepting it. Everyone watched in horror as the drone neared its target. But then something incredible happened. The alien ship didn't fire back. Instead, it emitted a soft blue light, and the drone simply stopped in midair, suspended by some kind of force field. The weapon was neutralized without a single shot being fired. Dr. West let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The aliens weren't here for war. They were proving it once again. They had the power to destroy, but they chose not to. This was the turning point, the final showdown, not of violence, but of trust. Captain Harris looked at the alien beside her. "You stopped it," she said, almost in disbelief. The alien nodded once, slowly, and in that moment, humanity understood. The aliens had come not to conquer, but to guide. They had seen the destruction of other worlds and had given Earth one final chance to avoid the same fate. Dr. West's voice came over the radio. "This is our moment," he said again, quieter this time, but more powerful than ever. "We've been given a second chance. Let's not waste it." As the world watched, the alien ships slowly began to ascend, their mission complete. They had seen what they needed to see. Humanity wasn't perfect, but it had chosen peace over fear. And in the end, that made all the difference. The final showdown wasn't about fighting. It was about proving that Earth was worth saving.